18 years ago, her toddler was abducted from the daycare, shattering her world and stealing the most precious part of her life. But then, one day she reads a fashion magazine and sees something shocking. Clara Marin stood among the towering bookshelves of Asheville Public Library, breathing in the familiar scent of paper and binding glue as she methodically returned books to their assigned places. At 45, her light brown hair now carried strands of silver, but her hands still moved with the same practiced precision they had for the past 20 years. The library had been her sanctuary, her constant companion through life's most devastating chapter. As she positioned a worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird back onto its shelf, movement at the library entrance caught her attention. A young mother, perhaps in her late 20s, struggled through the door while balancing a shopping bag and the hand of a toddler. The little girl, no more than 2 years old, bounced with each step, her blonde pigtails swinging like pendulums. "Excuse me," the mother called, approaching Clara's desk. "Could you point me toward the children's section?" Clara smiled warmly. "Of course, it's right through that archway and to your left. We just got some new picture books in yesterday." "Thank you," the mother said, tugging gently at her daughter's hand. The toddler, however, had other plans. Her tiny fingers reached for a display of colorful bookmarks, sending several fluttering to the floor. "Sophie, no touching," the mother scolded gently, crouching to collect the scattered bookmarks. "It's quite all right," Clara laughed, waving away the mother's embarrassed apology. "That's what they're there for, to grab attention." The little girl's eyes widened at Clara, and she offered a toothy grin that caught Clara's heart in a vice grip of memory. That smile, so free, so curious about everything the world had to offer, just like Ella's had been. As the mother and daughter disappeared into the children's section, Clara's practiced smile faltered. 18 years had passed, but moments like these still transported her back to that terrible day with brutal clarity. The call she'd missed while shelving books in the library basement, the 3 voicemails from little Acorn's daycare that went unheard because her phone was tucked away in her purse. The police cars already parked outside when she arrived for pickup, their lights casting ominous red and blue shadows across the playground equipment. "There must be some mistake," she'd told the officer who approached her. "I'm just here to pick up my daughter Ella Marin." The weight of his hand on her shoulder, the gentle way he'd asked her to come inside. The security footage they showed her later that week, a trusted staff member, Maurice Pledger, leading Ella by the hand to the playground gate, checking her surroundings, then quickly bundling the child into a waiting car. For months, the search consumed everything. Clara's marriage couldn't survive the strain. Her husband David moved out before the year was done, unable to bear living in a home filled with reminders of their missing child. But Clara refused to leave Asheville. What if Ella somehow found her way back? What if there was a breakthrough in the case? The police found Maurice's body 2 weeks after the abduction, hanging from a tree in Pisgah National Forest. Suicide, they said. Guilt, they surmised. But no sign of Ella. The case grew colder with each passing year, despite Clara's desperate attempts to keep it alive. Ella's distinctive port wine birthmark, a violet-hued patch around her left eye shaped like a lotus blossom, featured in every missing child report, every news article, every flyer Clara stapled to telephone poles until they disintegrated with age and weather. "Clara?" The voice jolted her back to the present. Sarah, her co-worker, was looking at her with concern. "You okay? You've been staring at that shelf for 5 minutes." Clara blinked rapidly. "I'm fine, just remembering." Sarah's expression softened with understanding. After 15 years working together, she knew what those moments of stillness meant. "Why don't you head to the back room? The new deliveries came in this morning. I'll finish up here." Clara nodded gratefully. Sometimes the kindness of others still caught her off guard, even after all these years. In the back room, cardboard boxes were stacked neatly by the receiving desk. Clara pulled a box cutter from the drawer and methodically began opening the first package, her mind settling into the comfort of routine. Inside were the monthly magazine subscriptions, The Atlantic, National Geographic, and several glossy fashion publications that had proven surprisingly popular with their patrons. Clara lifted out the stack, ready to log them into the system, when the top magazine stopped her hand mid-air. Vogue. And on its cover, staring back at her with familiar eyes, was a young woman with a distinctive violet birthmark around her left eye, the exact shape of a lotus blossom. The backdrop was a sunlit farm, the model dressed in an off-the-shoulder red blouse, a patterned scarf tied over her head, and a denim jeans, looking nothing like a typical fashion model. The headline read, "The New Elegance." Clara's knees buckled. She grabbed the edge of the desk to steady herself, her other hand flying to cover her mouth as a sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob escaped her lips. The face was different, mature, the roundness of childhood replaced with defined cheekbones and a strong jawline. But Clara would recognize that birthmark anywhere. She'd traced it with her finger countless times as she'd rocked Ella to sleep. She'd described it to police officers, sketch artists, and anyone else who would listen. After 18 years of dead ends and fading hope, Clara Marin was looking at her daughter. With trembling hands, Clara flipped open the magazine, the crisp pages crackling under her fingertips. The cover shot had captured her attention, but it was the editorial spread inside that made her heart pound against her ribcage like a trapped bird. She found the feature article on page 32, titled, "A Visual Ode to the Hands and Hearts That Keep America Growing." The photographs were stunning, candid shots of farm life across rural America, each image infused with an authenticity rarely seen in high-fashion publications. And there she was again. The young woman Clara believed to be Ella appeared in a full-page photograph, looking over her shoulder at the camera. Unlike the other models in perfectly styled farm attire, this shot had a spontaneous quality. The woman was genuinely working, caught in a moment of pause. The sunlight caught in her light brown hair, illuminating strands of honey gold that Clara recognized from her own mirror. And there, unmistakable even in profile, was the birthmark. Clara's eyes darted to the caption beneath the photo, "Emmy Wells 20, at Kessler Farm in rural Appalachia." Emmy Wells, not Ella Marin, but the age matched. Ella would be 20 now, having been nearly 2 when she disappeared 18 years ago. With a deep breath to steady herself, Clara began reading the interview snippet that accompanied the photographs. "What's your name?" "Emmy Wells, That's a lovely name." "Thanks, my mama says I was born with dirt in my veins. Why don't you wear makeup like your friends?" "Didn't have time. Was hauling hay before you showed up." "Your eyes, there's something rare about them." The rest of the article shifted focus to broader agricultural issues, the economic challenges faced by local farmers competing with imported products, the environmental impact of sustainable farming practices, the revival of traditional agricultural methods among younger generations. But Clara barely registered these details. Her mind was fixed on the young woman with her daughter's birthmark, her daughter's age, and something in her expression that reminded Clara so much of David, that quiet determination, that graceful strength. At the end of the article, Clara found what she needed. Photography by Lila Dalton. She glanced at the clock on the wall, 2:15 p.m. Pulling out her cell phone, Clara quickly searched for Detective Gary Holden's number. He'd been the lead investigator on Ella's case all those years ago, and although they'd fallen out of contact over the last few years, she still had his number saved. The call went straight to voicemail. Gary's recorded voice asked her to leave a message, but Clara hung up instead. This wasn't something to explain over voicemail. The magazine in her hands felt too important, too urgent to wait. Decision made, Clara gathered her purse and the magazine, then rushed to the front desk where Sarah was helping an elderly patron. "Sarah, I need to leave now." Clara's voice was strained, her eyes wide with barely contained emotion. Sarah took one look at Clara's face, then at the magazine clutched in her white-knuckled grip. "What's happened?" Clara flipped the magazine to show the cover. "I think I found her, Sarah. I think I found Ella." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth as she recognized the birthmark. Everyone at the library knew about Clara's missing daughter. Many of them had helped distribute flyers in those first desperate years. "Go," Sarah said immediately. "We'll cover your shift. Do you need someone to go with you?" No, I need to go to the police station. Show them this. Clara was already backing toward the door, as if afraid the magazine might vanish if she wasted another second. Let us know what happens, Sarah called after her, and Clara... She hesitated, then offered a cautious smile. Good luck. Other staff members looked up from their tasks, catching on to the commotion. Marty from reference approached, followed by Diane from circulation. When they saw the magazine, a flurry of supportive comments and hopeful wishes followed Clara as she made her way to the exit. In the parking lot, Clara slid behind the wheel of her aging Honda Civic, the magazine placed carefully on the passenger seat beside her. For a moment she simply sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel, forcing herself to breathe. 18 years of false leads and disappointments had taught her to guard her hope carefully. But the birthmark, that distinctive marking, couldn't be a coincidence. It was too unique, too perfectly matched to Ella's. Clara arrived at the police station. She entered and met with the police officer at the front desk. She made her query, showing the magazine, and asked if Detective Gary Holden was here. The police said yes and asked her to wait. Then they led her inside to meet the detective. Detective Gary Holden had aged considerably since Clara had last seen him. His hair had gone completely grey, and deep lines marked his face, but his eyes were as kind and determined as she remembered. He'd been a young detective when Ella disappeared. It had been one of his first major cases, and Clara knew he'd never truly let it go. Clara, he said, rising from his desk, it's been a while. I found something, she said without preamble, setting the magazine on his desk. I think I found Ella. Clara showed him the magazine and said she found a lead. They compared the photo with Ella's childhood pictures, and the lotus-shaped birthmark looked identical. The detective quickly contacted the fashion magazine agency and asked about their recent publication and the photographer Lila Dalton. The detective put the call on speaker so Clara could listen as well. The magazine agency told the police they visited remote farms in rural Appalachia and other old traditional American places for this month's edition. Lila Dalton spontaneously photographed farmer families in everyday, non-professional settings. The representative on the phone was excited about how authentic the images had turned out. Ms. Dalton has a real eye for capturing genuine moments, the woman explained. The spread has been getting wonderful feedback. I'm sure it has, Detective Gary said. We're actually calling about one specific photograph, the young woman on the cover, Emmy Wells. Oh yes, she was quite a find. Not a professional model at all, just a farm girl with the most interesting birthmark. Makes her look quite mysterious, doesn't it? Clara pressed her hand to her mouth, fighting back tears as the woman casually discussed her daughter's distinctive mark. The detective requested the specific location where they took the photograph of Emmy Wells. They said it was at the Kessler farm. The owners of the farm were John and Miriam Kessler. The representative said there's no specific point on the map, but they gave them another farm's name and location, saying that Kessler Farm was about 10 miles north of it. This is enough to reopen the investigation, he said carefully after the phone call ended. I'll put together a team to visit the Kessler Farm immediately. Clara stood up, determination etched on her face. I'm going with them. Gary hesitated. Clara, in cases like this... I'm going, Gary, she interrupted, her voice leaving no room for argument. I've waited 18 years. I'm not waiting another day. This is as close as we've ever gotten. After a moment, Gary nodded. I understand, but I need to make some arrangements first. I have a court appearance scheduled for later today that I can't miss. Clara's face fell. You're not coming. I can't, he said apologetically, but I'll send my best officers and I'll join you tomorrow. The important thing is to establish if this Emmy Wells is your Ella, and if so, how she ended up at the Kessler farm. Clara nodded reluctantly. When can we leave? I'll have a team ready in 30 minutes. 2 officers will accompany you to the farm. Gary paused, placing a hand on her shoulder. Clara, I need you to prepare yourself. Even if this young woman is Ella, she's been living another life for 18 years. She may not remember you. Clara swallowed hard. I know, but she's my daughter. That's all that matters right now. As promised, within half an hour, Clara found herself being introduced to Officers Bennett and Martinez, who would be accompanying her to the Kessler farm. "I'd like to follow in my own car," Clara told them. "I have some of Ella's childhood belongings in the trunk. Things I've kept, just in case." The officers exchanged glances, but agreed to her request. As Clara walked toward the parking lot, her heart hammered with equal parts hope and fear. After nearly 2 decades of emptiness, she was finally on the path to finding her daughter. A daughter who might not even know she was lost. The convoy of 2 vehicles, Clara's Honda Civic trailing the marked police cruiser, wound its way out of Asheville and into the countryside, the paved highways narrowing into winding roads through dense forests and rolling hills over the 2-hour drive. Gripping the wheel tightly, Clara followed closely, each passing mile fueling the storm inside her, hope that she was about to see her daughter again, and terror that Emmy Wells might look at her as a stranger. The afternoon sun hung high in the clear autumn sky when the GPS finally announced they were approaching their destination. The police car slowed, turning onto a gravel driveway marked by a weathered wooden sign, "Kessler Farm Established, 1962." The property was impressive, a sprawling farmhouse with a wide front porch surrounded by well-maintained barns and outbuildings. Fields of crops stretched into the distance, and a small orchard occupied the hillside behind the house. This was no struggling family farm, but a prosperous agricultural operation. As Clara parked behind the police cruiser, a middle-aged couple emerged from the farmhouse. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, with a weather-beaten face that spoke of decades working outdoors. The woman beside him was petite, her greying hair pulled back in a practical bun, her expression wary as she observed the police car. Officers Bennett and Martinez approached the couple, badges displayed. Clara hung back slightly, her heart thundering in her chest as she strained to hear the conversation. "Mr. and Mrs. Kessler?" Officer Bennett asked. "That's right," the man confirmed. "I'm John Kessler, and this is my wife, Miriam. What brings the police all the way out here?" Officer Bennett gestured toward Clara. "This is Mrs. Clara Marin. She has reason to believe that a young woman who was photographed on your property might be her daughter, who went missing 18 years ago." John and Miriam exchanged a quick glance that Clara couldn't quite interpret. "You must mean the magazine people," Miriam said carefully. "They were here a few weeks ago, taking pictures for some fashion spread." "We're looking for a young woman named Emmy Wells," Officer Martinez clarified. "According to the magazine, she was working here when they did their photo shoot." John Kessler shook his head slowly. "Emmy doesn't work for us permanently. She was just helping out that day. We rotate workers weekly from other farms in the area. Labor sharing, you know." Clara stepped forward, unable to contain herself any longer. "My daughter had a distinctive birthmark around her left eye," she said, her voice surprisingly steady as she pulled out a childhood photograph of Ella. "Just like the young woman in these photographs, my daughter was taken from her daycare when she was almost 2 years old." Miriam's face softened with what appeared to be genuine sympathy. "I'm so sorry about your daughter, Mrs. Marin. I can't imagine what you've been through." She studied the photograph Clara held out. "The birthmark is similar, I'll grant you that, but Emmy just happened to be working here that day. After the photo shoot, we haven't seen her again." "Do you know where we might find her?" Officer Bennett asked. John scratched his beard thoughtfully. "She came from Rowan's farm, I believe. He's the one who sends us day workers when we need extra hands." "Rowan," Clara repeated. "Do you have his full name and address?" John shook his head. "Just Rowan." "It's a family arrangement. Been that way since my father's time. I've got his number, though." He pulled a small notebook from his pocket and tore out a page, scribbling a number on it. "Don't know where his place is exactly. Never been there myself. Somewhere up in the mountains, I hear. Pretty isolated." Officer Martinez accepted the paper. "Thank you, Mr. Kessler. Would you mind if we take a look around your property, just to be thorough?" The Kesslers hesitated, exchanging another of those unreadable glances. "Well, I suppose that would be all right," John finally agreed, though his tone suggested reluctance. Not sure what you expect to find, but you're welcome to look. Thank you, Officer Bennett said. Mrs. Marin, would you like to wait here while we check the premises? Clara nodded, not trusting herself to speak. As the officers moved toward the barn, she found herself studying the Kesslers. There was something in their manner that didn't quite sit right with her. A careful precision to their words, a tension in their postures that seemed at odds with their cooperative attitudes. Miriam noticed her scrutiny and offered a tight smile. Would you like some water or tea, Mrs. Marin? It's a long drive from Asheville. No, thank you, Clara replied, then hesitated before adding, when Emmy was here, did she mention anything about her family, her childhood? Not really, Miriam said. She was quiet, kept to herself mostly. Good worker, though, very diligent. John nodded in agreement. Farm kids usually are, raised with a strong work ethic. 20 minutes later, the officers returned, their expressions neutral. Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. and Mrs. Kessler, Officer Martinez said. Everything seems to be in order. The group returned to the vehicles where Officer Bennett made a call to the station, relaying the phone number for Rowan and requesting any information they could find on him. Clara listened as Bennett explained the situation, then waited as the dispatcher ran the number through their database. After several minutes, Bennett ended the call with a frown. Nothing, he informed Clara and his partner. The number doesn't appear in any of our systems, and there's no cellular service registered to it in any of the surrounding counties. If this Rowan lives as remotely as the Kesslers suggest, he might be outside regular coverage areas. What does that mean? Clara asked, her heart sinking. How do we find him? We'll try calling the number directly, Martinez suggested, dialing on his phone. After several moments, he shook his head. No connection. Either the number is incorrect or he's somewhere with no service. Clara glanced at her watch. It was nearly 4 in the afternoon. The autumn days were growing shorter, and darkness would fall within a couple of hours. What now? She asked, fighting to keep the desperation from her voice. Bennett sighed. Without a specific location, we can't just drive aimlessly into the mountains looking for this farm. I think our best option is to return to Asheville, gather more resources, and start fresh in the morning. Detective Holden will be available tomorrow, and he might have some additional ideas or contacts. Clara wanted to protest, to insist they continue searching, but the pragmatic part of her knew they were right. Without a clear direction, they could waste hours driving through remote mountain roads and still find nothing. All right, she agreed reluctantly, but I'm not going all the way back to Asheville tonight. I'll find somewhere local to stay, a motel or something. That way we can start early tomorrow. The officers nodded in understanding. That's reasonable, Martinez said. We'll report back to the station and coordinate with Detective Holden for tomorrow morning. As they parted ways, Clara sat in her car for a long moment, staring at the Kessler farmhouse in her rearview mirror. Something about John and Miriam's carefully measured responses nagged at her. They had been polite, sympathetic even, but there was a guardedness about them that seemed out of place for people with nothing to hide. With a deep breath, Clara started her engine. She was closer to finding Ella than she'd been in 18 years. One more night wouldn't break her, not after all this time. The fading afternoon light cast long shadows across the rural landscape as Clara drove away from the Kessler farm. Her mind raced with unanswered questions, her emotions oscillating between hope and frustration. After driving for about 20 minutes, she spotted a modest roadside establishment with a flickering neon sign, Pine Ridge Motel, vacancy. The motel was a single-story building with perhaps a dozen rooms. Clara parked in front of the office and stepped out, stretching her stiff limbs after the long day of driving. Inside, a middle-aged woman with bottle-red hair and reading glasses perched on her nose looked up from a dog-eared paperback. "Help you?" she asked, setting her book aside. "I need a room for the night," Clara replied. "Just one person." $29 includes cable TV and hot water, the woman said, pushing a registration card across the desk. "I'm Dottie, by the way. I own the place." Clara filled out the form and handed over her cash. As Dottie processed the payment, Clara noticed a flyer on the bulletin board advertising local attractions. One image caught her eye, a rustic building with strings of lights illuminating a wooden deck. "What's that place?" she asked, pointing to the flyer. Dottie glanced over. "Oh, that's Miller's Tavern. Popular spot around here, just across the road, actually." She nodded toward the window, where Clara could see a larger building on the opposite side of the highway. "They've got good food, live music sometimes. Tonight's their comedy night, I think. Always draws a crowd." Clara accepted her room key, her mind already forming a plan. "Does it get busy?" "With locals, I mean." "Sure does, especially on event nights. Farmers, tradespeople, all the folks from around these parts gather there. It's about the only entertainment for 20 miles in any direction." Dottie studied Clara with newfound curiosity. "You're not from around here, are you?" "No, I'm from Asheville. I'm actually looking for someone." Clara hesitated, then pulled out the magazine she'd carefully kept, revealing the cover featuring Emmy. "Have you ever seen this young woman? She might go by the name Emmy Wells." Dottie squinted at the page, then shook her head. "Can't say I have. Pretty girl, though. That birthmark is something else." Clara's hopes deflated slightly. What about a man named Rowan? Supposedly has a farm somewhere in the mountains. "I think I have." But again, Dottie shook her head. "Sorry, honey. Lot of farmers around these parts, and I can't be certain." She handed back Clara's magazine. "But like I said, the tavern gets all the locals. If you're looking for information, that's your best bet." "Thank you," Clara said, pocketing her phone. "I'll try there tonight." "Room 8, Dottie said, handing over a key attached to a plastic tag. "End of the row next to the ice machine. Checkout's at 11 tomorrow." Clara thanked her again and retreated to her room. After a quick shower to rinse off the day's tension, she waited until the event's start time before heading to the tavern. If local insight could lead her to the elusive Rowan, and possibly to Emmy, she couldn't risk missing the chance. Miller's Tavern was exactly as Clara had imagined a rural country establishment would be. Wooden walls adorned with vintage farming equipment and taxidermy, mismatched tables and chairs scattered throughout the space, and a long bar stretching along one wall. The air was thick with the smell of fried food, beer, and the faint trace of cigarette smoke that had seeped into the wood over decades. Despite it being a weeknight, the place was bustling. A small stage at the far end of the room featured a young man with a beard and flannel shirt delivering punchlines to an appreciative audience. Laughter rippled through the crowd as Clara made her way to the bar. She found an empty stool and settled in, scanning the room. Most patrons were focused on the comedy show, though some gathered around the large wooden tables at the back, engaged in their own conversations. At the bar itself, a few solitary drinkers nursed their beverages, seemingly regulars based on their comfortable demeanor. "What can I get you?" a voice asked. Clara turned to find a bartender looking at her expectantly. He was young, early 20s perhaps, with dark hair pulled back in a small ponytail, and the kind of easy smile that suggested he genuinely enjoyed his work. "Just a club soda, please," Clara replied. The bartender nodded, filling a glass with ice and soda water. As he placed it before her, he tilted his head curiously. "First time at Miller's?" he asked. Clara nodded. "Is it that obvious?" He chuckled. "Small town, I know most faces that come through that door." He extended his hand. "I'm Bran Pledger. This is my dad's place, but I'm the one who runs it most nights." The name sent a jolt through Clara's system. Pledger, the same surname as Maurice, the daycare worker who had abducted Ella, but it couldn't be. Pledger wasn't an uncommon name, and this young man would have been a child himself when Ella disappeared. "Clara," she managed, returning his handshake. "Clara Marin." "So, Clara Marin," Bran said, leaning slightly against the bar. "What brings you to our little corner of nowhere? We don't get many tourists this time of year." Clara took a sip of her club soda, gathering her thoughts. "I'm looking for someone, actually." "Oh," Bran raised an eyebrow. "Anyone I might know?" Clara hesitated, then decided on honesty. "My daughter. She was taken from her daycare 18 years ago when she was almost 2. The words still caught in her throat, even after all this time. I never found her. Bran's easy smile faded, replaced by genuine concern. I'm sorry to hear that. That's awful. I think I might have a lead, Clara said, reaching instinctively for the magazine before realizing it wasn't in her bag. Oh, my bad. This brain's getting old. I left it in my car, but there was a young woman featured in a fashion magazine with my daughter's distinctive birthmark. The photo was taken at a farm nearby, the Kessler farm. Bran straightened up slightly. The Kesslers? They don't come in here much. Keep to themselves mostly. The woman in the photo was named Emmy Wells, Clara pressed. The Kesslers said she was a day worker. As she spoke, Clara noticed Bran's expression shifting subtly, a tightening around his eyes, a slight tensing of his jaw. My mother worked at a daycare center, he said suddenly, his voice quieter, before she passed away. Clara's heart skipped a beat. Oh? Where was that? Asheville, Bran replied, but she died when I was young. My dad raised me after that. He gestured vaguely toward the tavern. Built this place up from nothing. A chill ran down Clara's spine. What were the odds of such a coincidence? Your mother, she began carefully. What was her name? Maurice, he answered. Maurice Pledger. The name hit Clara like a physical blow. Maurice Pledger, the daycare worker who had taken Ella, the woman whose body had been found in the forest 2 weeks after the abduction. Clara struggled to keep her expression neutral as her mind raced. The police had concluded that Maurice had committed suicide, probably out of guilt after selling Ella away, because the police couldn't find the girl with her. Is everything okay? Bran asked, noticing her reaction. You look like you've seen a ghost. I'm fine, Clara lied, just tired from the drive. She glanced around the bar, trying to gather her thoughts. That's when she spotted it. A framed photograph of the woman on the shelf behind the bar, partially hidden among bottles of liquor. Actually, I'm not. Clara took a deep breath. Bran, I need to tell you something, she said, her voice low but steady. Your mother. I know who she was. Bran frowned. What do you mean? I recognized her in that photograph because I've seen her face hundreds of times. Clara pulled out her phone, scrolling to an old news article with Maurice's photo. Your mother was the daycare worker who took my daughter. Bran's face drained of color as he looked from the phone to Clara and back again. No, he said, shaking his head. That can't be right. My mom, she was a good person. Dad always said... The security cameras at Little Acorn's daycare captured her leading my daughter out to a waiting car, Clara continued, her voice gaining strength. 2 weeks later, they found her body in Pisgah National Forest. The police believed she killed herself out of guilt. Bran braced himself against the bar, visibly shaken. This can't be happening, he muttered. Then louder, Are you sure? Absolutely sure it was her. Clara nodded. I'm certain, Bran, I'm sorry. He ran a hand over his face, then abruptly turned and called to another bartender, Jake, cover for me. Without waiting for a reply, he motioned for Clara to follow him to a quieter corner of the tavern. Once seated at an empty table, Bran leaned forward, his voice barely audible over the comedy show still in progress. My dad told me Mum died because of debt collectors, he said. He said my mum had paid back a man my dad owed money to, but the man killed her anyway and made it look like suicide. He hung her from a tree. Clara's breath caught. The official report was suicide, but there were always questions. She hesitated, then asked, Did your father ever mention anything about a child? About what happened to her? Bran shook his head vehemently. No, never. I was only 5 when Mum died. Dad never talked much about it. It was too painful for him. His eyes suddenly widened with realization. You think my mom took your daughter to pay off my dad's debts, and then what? Sold her? That was the police theory, Clara confirmed softly. But they never found Ella. The trail went cold after your mother died. Bran was quiet for a long moment, processing this revelation. Finally, he said, "I'm so sorry for what my family did to yours. I had no idea." His eyes met Clara's, filled with genuine remorse. "But now you think your daughter might be here, this Emmy person?" Clara nodded. "The birthmark is identical, a violet patch around the left eye shaped like a lotus blossom, and she's the right age." "And the Kesslers mentioned someone named Rowan," Bran murmured, more to himself than to Clara. He suddenly straightened. "Rowan is my father's name." Clara stared at him in shock. "Your father is Rowan Pledger?" Bran nodded slowly. "Yes, and I'd recognize his phone number anywhere, but that's the old one." He pulled out his phone, showing her the contact entry for Dad. The new number didn't match the one John Kessler had given to the police. "The Kesslers lied," Clara whispered. "They said they didn't know where Rowan lived, that he was somewhere in the mountains. But if he's your father, and he owns this tavern—" "He doesn't live at the tavern," Bran explained. "He has a place about 20 minutes from here. A small farm, nothing like the Kesslers' operation, but enough to grow some crops and raise a few animals." He paused, a conflicted expression crossing his face. "I don't see him much these days, not since—" "Since what?" Clara prompted gently. Bran sighed heavily. "Since I found out about his gambling problems. The tavern does well now, but Dad still has issues. I've been trying to keep my distance, focus on running this place right." He met Clara's gaze with newfound determination. "But I think it's time I paid him a visit, and I think you should come with me." Clara felt a surge of hope mixed with apprehension. "You'd do that? Even after what I just told you about your mother?" "Especially because of that," Bran replied firmly. "If my family had anything to do with taking your daughter, then I need to help make it right." He glanced at his watch. "It's not too late, we could go now." "Now?" Clara echoed, suddenly nervous at how quickly things were moving. Bran nodded. "Jake can handle the bar for the rest of the night." He looked at Clara intently. "Unless you'd rather wait until morning. Get the police involved." Clara considered this briefly, then shook her head. "Number, I've waited 18 years. I don't want to wait another minute." Bran stood, determination in his stance. "I'll tell Jake I'm leaving and we can go. My car's out back, but—" "I'll follow in my car," Clara interjected. "I have some things there. Photographs, belongings of Ella's that I've kept. They might help." With a nod of agreement, Bran went to inform his co-worker while Clara finished her drink, her mind racing with possibilities. Was she finally on the verge of finding Ella after all these years? And if so, what role had Rowan Pledger played in her disappearance? The night had fully settled over the rural landscape as Clara followed Bran's pickup truck along winding back roads. Her headlights illuminated the occasional reflective eyes of wildlife watching from the roadside, and the moon cast an ethereal glow over the rolling countryside. During a straight stretch of road, Clara quickly used her phone to text Detective Holden that she believed she was getting closer to finding her daughter, and shared her pinpoint location with him just in case. She knew the reception was spotty in these rural areas, but hoped the message would go through. Clara's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, her mind replaying Bran's revelations about his parents. If Rowan Pledger was indeed the mysterious Rowan mentioned by the Kesslers, and if he was Maurice's husband, then the connections were becoming clearer and more disturbing. But one detail nagged at her. John Kessler had claimed Rowan lived up in the mountains, yet Bran's directions were taking them through relatively flat farmland. Either the Kesslers had been deliberately misleading, or they weren't talking about the same Rowan. After about 20 minutes of driving, Bran's pickup slowed, turning onto a narrow dirt road marked only by a weathered mailbox. Clara followed cautiously, her sedan bouncing over the uneven surface. Before they reached the house, Clara noticed a vehicle. An older model sedan was pulling out of the driveway ahead. Bran must have noticed as well, and that vehicle must be Rowan's, because Bran's pickup had trailed behind it, putting a distance between Clara's and the sedan. The roads became progressively narrower, the landscape more densely wooded. Clara drove more slowly than Rowan's car, unfamiliar with the terrain and concerned about damaging her vehicle on the rough roads. Bran, however, seemed determined not to lose sight of his father's car. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, but was probably only 10 minutes, the car ahead turned into a clearing. As Clara followed Bran's truck into the open space, she saw a small farmhouse and several outbuildings. The property was modest compared to the Kesslers' operation, but well maintained, with a small vegetable garden visible in the moonlight and a fenced pasture where a few goats were visible. Rowan's car was parked haphazardly near the house, its driver's door still open. Bran pulled up beside it, and Clara parked a short distance away. As she exited her car, Clara could hear Bran calling out to his father, "Dad, what are you doing at the farm this late? I went by your house and saw you leaving." Rowan Pledger stood by his car, a tall man with the same dark hair as his son, though streaked with grey. His weathered face held a mixture of confusion and wariness as he looked from Bran to Clara. "Bran, what are you doing here?" he asked, his voice deep and gruff. "And who's this woman?" Bran approached his father, his posture tense. "This is Clara Marin, Dad. She came to the tavern looking for her daughter, a daughter who was kidnapped 18 years ago by Mom." Rowan's expression shifted, a flash of recognition quickly masked by confusion. "What are you talking about? Your mother never kidnapped anyone." "She did, Dad," Bran said, his voice tight with emotion. "Clara has proof. Security camera footage from the daycare where Mom worked. She took Clara's daughter, a little girl named Ella." Rowan's eyes darted to Clara, then back to his son. "This is ridiculous. Why would you bring this woman here, making these kinds of accusations in the middle of a night?" Clara stepped forward, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "Mr. Pledger, I'm not here to cause trouble. I just want to find my daughter. The Kesslers mentioned someone named Rowan, who arranges day workers for their farm, and gave me your number. I've been trying to reach you, but I couldn't get through. Your son said it was one of the old lines." A subtle shift occurred in Rowan's demeanor at the mention of the Kesslers. His shoulders tensed and his expression hardened. "Those rich idiots," he muttered, almost to himself. Then louder, "Look, I don't know what the Kesslers told you, but—" Before he could finish, the front door of the farmhouse opened, and a young woman stepped onto the porch. "Rowan," she called out, "what's going on out there? Why didn't you come inside?" The voice belonged to a young woman Clara couldn't quite make out in the darkness, but her silhouette was unmistakable, tall and slender, with hair that fell past her shoulders. Clara's heart skipped a beat. Could it be? But Rowan quickly moved to intercept any view of the porch. "Nothing to worry about," he called back. "Just some unexpected visitors. Go back inside, I'll be there in a minute." The figure hesitated but remained on the porch, clearly curious about the late-night commotion. "Is that Emmy?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Emmy Wells?" Rowan's face darkened. "You need to leave, both of you, now." Bran stepped closer to his father. "Dad, what's going on? Who is that woman? And why are Mom and Dad sending people to you about day workers?" The standoff might have continued, but the young woman on the porch apparently decided to investigate for herself. She descended the steps and walked toward the group, her features gradually becoming visible in the combined glow of the porch light and the vehicle's headlights. "What's happening?" she asked, looking between the three adults with confusion. And that's when Clara saw it. The distinctive violet birthmark around the young woman's left eye, shaped exactly like a lotus blossom, exactly like Ella's. "Oh my God," Clara breathed, her legs suddenly unsteady. The young woman, Emmy, looked at Clara with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "Who are you?" Clara took a hesitant step forward, every fiber of her being wanting to rush to the young woman and embrace her. But she restrained herself, recognizing the wariness in Emmy's expression. "My name is Clara Marin," she said gently. I believe you might be my daughter." Emmy stared at Clara, her expression morphing from confusion to disbelief. "What? That's impossible. My parents are John and Miriam Kessler." Rowan stepped between them, his weathered face tight with tension. "Now hold on. This woman has no proof of anything. She's making wild accusations." Bran moved closer to Emmy, studying her face with newfound attention. "The birthmark," he murmured. "It's exactly as Clara described." Emmy self-consciously touched the violet mark around her left eye. "What about my birthmark?" Clara slowly reached into her purse and withdrew her phone. With trembling fingers, she pulled up a photo album and turned the screen toward Emmy. "This is my daughter, Ella. She was taken from her daycare when she was almost 2 years old, 18 years ago." Emmy reluctantly looked at the screen, her eyes widening at the series of photos showing a toddler with an identical birthmark. "This doesn't make sense," she said, her voice barely audible. "I grew up on the farm. I've always lived with John and Miriam." Rowan made a dismissive sound. "This is ridiculous. Emmy, go back inside. I need to speak with these people alone." Emmy ignored him, her attention fixed on Clara's phone as she swiped through more childhood photos. "If what you're saying is true, then John and Miriam—" "Aren't your parents," Clara finished softly. "The Kesslers told me that you were a day worker sent by Rowan. They claimed they barely knew you." Emmy's head snapped up at this, her expression hardening. "What? That's a lie. They raised me." Rowan cursed under his breath. Those Kessler morons, what were they thinking? Giving away my name and number? Bran turned to his father, suspicion darkening his features. "Dad, what's going on here? What do you know about this?" Rowan looked between the three faces staring at him and seemed to deflate slightly. "Look, it's complicated." "Uncomplicate it," Bran demanded, an edge in his voice that Clara hadn't heard before. Rowan ran a hand through his greying hair. "The Kesslers asked me to keep Emmy here for a few weeks. They said someone was looking for her, someone dangerous who might try to take her away because they couldn't pay their debt." "Debt?" Emmy echoed, confusion evident on her face. "What debt?" "The farm is doing well, it always has." "That's what they told me," Rowan insisted. "They said there were creditors, dangerous people looking for you. They wanted to keep you safe until things blew over." Bran scoffed. "And you believed them? After what happened with Mom?" "What about his mum?" Emmy asked, looking increasingly distressed by the unfolding revelations. Clara stepped forward cautiously. "Bran's mother, Maurice Pledger, worked at Little Acorns Daycare in Asheville. She's the one who took my daughter, who took you, 18 years ago." "You would have been too young to remember anything before," Clara explained gently. "You weren't even 2 years old when you disappeared." "But why?" Emmy asked, her voice breaking slightly. "Why would someone take me from my family?" Bran looked at his father accusingly. "Dad had gambling debts. The police believed Mom took Ella to pay them off. Then those creditors killed Mom and made it look like suicide." Emmy leaned against the porch railing, visibly shaken. "So if I'm really this Ella person, how did I end up with John and Miriam?" "Your parents have always wanted children," Rowan explained reluctantly. "They couldn't have their own. They'd been trying to adopt for years, but were always rejected because of John's past. He had some legal troubles when he was younger, so they found another way." "They bought me?" Emmy asked, her voice hollow with disbelief. Rowan nodded slowly. "From the same people who killed Maurice, yes. Those creditors weren't just loan sharks. They were involved in more lucrative enterprises." Emmy wrapped her arms around herself, as if suddenly cold despite the mild evening. "So everything I thought I knew about myself is a lie?" "This is insane," Emmy said, anger rising in her voice. "Everyone is lying about everything." Before the night could get any deeper, the sound of sirens cut through the night, distant but approaching rapidly. "Someone called the police," Rowan said, panic rising in his voice. "Number, this can't be. If the Kessler knew about this, or those traffickers, if they suspected police involvement, they would send people after me." "No more running," Emmy said firmly. "No more lies." She pulled out her cell phone, showing the screen. "I called them when I first heard you arguing outside. I want the truth, all of it, and I'm not afraid to face it." The flashing lights of police cruisers lit up the farmyard as several officers approached. Clara recognized some of them from earlier that day, but Officers Bennett and Martinez were nowhere in sight. "What's going on here?" asked an officer, his hand resting cautiously on his holster as he assessed the situation. Emmy stepped forward. "I called you. My name is Emmy Wells, at least that's what I've always been told. But this woman," she gestured to Clara, "says I'm her daughter who was kidnapped 18 years ago." The officer's eyes widened slightly as he connected the dots. "You're the missing person from Asheville? The one with the birthmark?" Emmy nodded, unconsciously touching the violet mark around her eye. Clara reached out. Another officer spoke into his radio, confirming they had located the subject of the recent alert. "We'll need all of you to come to the station to sort this out," the first officer said. Clara stepped forward and reported the Kesslers to the nearest officer, urgently explaining their involvement in Emmy's abduction. The officer's expression turned grave as he radioed for backup to bring the Kesslers in for questioning. "We're going to need all of you to come to the station immediately," he said. "We have officers securing this property as a potential crime scene." They were each guided to separate police vehicles. As Clara was escorted to a cruiser, she caught Emmy's eye. The young woman's expression was a complex mixture of fear, determination, and something like hope. At the station, Clara was led to an interview room, a small sparse space with a table, 3 chairs, and a conspicuous camera mounted in one corner. An officer offered her water and informed her that Detective Holden from Asheville had been contacted and was en route. "He asked us to tell you he's about an hour away," the officer added. "In the meantime, we'd like to take your statement about what happened tonight." Clara recounted everything, finding the magazine, visiting the Kessler farm, meeting Bran at the tavern, and finally confronting Rowan at his property. The officer took detailed notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly letting Clara speak uninterrupted. When she had finished, the officer thanked her and left her alone with her thoughts. Time crept by slowly, the institutional clock on the wall marking each minute with a soft click that seemed to echo in the quiet room. After what felt like hours but was probably only 45 minutes, the door opened again. A different officer entered, his expression more formal than the previous one. "Mrs. Marin, I wanted to update you on the situation," he said, taking a seat across from her. "We've been interviewing the Kesslers and Mr. Pledger separately. Based on the preliminary information gathered, we believe there is substantial evidence supporting your claim that Emmy Wells is indeed your biological daughter, Ella Marin." Clara's heart leapt at these words, but the officer continued before she could respond. "The Kesslers have admitted to purchasing an infant from a third party 18 years ago. They claim they were desperate for a child and were approached by intermediaries who said they could provide one for the right price." "And they never questioned where the child came from?" Clara asked, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "They claim they were told the child was being given up by a mother who couldn't care for her," the officer explained, "but they've admitted they suspected the circumstances were not legitimate, which is why they isolated Ella on their farm and discouraged her from forming outside connections." Clara shook her head in disbelief. "They stole her entire life, her identity." "They will be facing charges," the officer confirmed. "As for Rowan Pledger, he's cooperating by providing information about the trafficking network his wife was involved with. While he was apparently part of it, we're still verifying the extent of his involvement. His cooperation could potentially reduce his sentence, but he will still face serious charges for his role in these operations." "What about Maurice Pledger's death?" Clara asked. "All these years it was ruled a suicide, but if what Rowan says is true—" "We're reopening that investigation based on Mr. Pledger's statement," the officer confirmed. "He claims the same criminal organization murdered his wife when they feared she might talk to authorities after the abduction gained significant media attention." Clara nodded slowly, processing this information. "And Emmy, what happens now?" The officer's expression softened slightly. "She's an adult, Mrs. Marin. Legally, she can make her own decisions about where she goes and who she maintains relationships with. But she has expressed interest in speaking with you further." Hope bloomed in Clara's chest. "Can I see her now?" "She's still being interviewed, but afterward, yes." The officer stood, adjusting his uniform. "Detective Holden should be arriving shortly. He's been briefed on the developments and will take over the case from here. As the officer reached the door, Clara called after him, "Officer, thank you for everything." He nodded once, then left her alone again with her thoughts and the steadily ticking clock. Clara sat in the small waiting area of the police station, a paper cup of lukewarm coffee held between her hands, more for comfort than consumption. The institutional lighting cast harsh shadows across the worn furniture, but Clara barely noticed her surroundings. Her eyes remained fixed on the hallway door, waiting for Ella, to emerge. When the door finally opened, Clara's breath caught in her throat. Emmy stood in the doorway, her posture straight despite the obvious exhaustion in her features. She hesitated for a moment, then walked toward Clara, taking the seat beside her. For a long moment neither spoke. The silence between them was filled with 18 years of absence, of lives lived apart, of experiences never shared. Finally, Emmy broke the silence. "I never thought I'd be in a police station at midnight discovering my entire life has been a lie." Despite the gravity of her words, there was a surprising steadiness in her voice. "I never thought I'd find you," Clara replied softly. "After all these years, I'd started to believe I never would." Emmy turned to face her, studying Clara's features with careful attention. "They're charging John and Miriam with kidnapping, falsification of documents, and obstruction of justice." "I'm sorry," Clara said, and found that she meant it. "I know they raised you, cared for you." "They did," Emmy acknowledged, "but they also isolated me, controlled who I could see, where I could go. They always said it was for my protection, that the outside world was dangerous." A bitter smile crossed her face. "I guess now I know why." Clara hesitated, then asked the question that had been burning in her mind. "How did you end up in that magazine? If they were so careful about keeping you hidden?" Emmy's expression softened slightly. "That was an accident. The photographer, Lila, was taking pictures of the neighboring farm. She got lost and ended up on our property. I was working in the fields when she spotted me." A small, proud smile touched her lips. "She said my birthmark was striking, unique, that it made me photogenic." I smiled for her. John and Miriam were furious afterward, but by then it was too late. The photos were already scheduled for publication. "I'm glad she got lost," Clara said. "That birthmark, it's how I knew it was you. I would have recognized it anywhere." Emmy touched the mark self-consciously. "The Kesslers always made me feel it was something to hide, something shameful." "It's beautiful," Clara assured her. "Your father, your birth father, David, he called it your lotus mark. He said it meant you were special." A flicker of interest crossed Emmy's face. "My father, is he—" "He's alive," Clara said. "We divorced a few years after you disappeared. The loss was too much for our marriage to bear. He remarried and moved to Colorado. We haven't spoken in years, but I know he'd want to meet you if you're interested." Emmy nodded slowly, absorbing this information. "All my life I've felt different, out of place somehow. There were things about me that never made sense in the context of the Kesslers, the way I think, the things I'm drawn to." She trailed off, lost in thought. "You have your father's determination," Clara offered gently, "and his kindness. Even as a toddler, you showed those traits." Emmy looked at her with sudden intensity. "I have so many questions about who I was, who I am, about my life before." "I'll answer anything I can," Clara promised. "We have time now." The door to the hallway opened again, and the detective appeared, looking tired but satisfied. He nodded respectfully to Clara before addressing them both. "The Kesslers are being processed for formal charges," he informed them. "Rowan Pledger is cooperating fully with our investigation into the trafficking network. His information could help break up one of the largest human trafficking operations in the Southeast." "What will happen to him?" Emmy asked. "He'll face charges for his involvement," Detective Holden explained, "but his cooperation will be taken into consideration. The fact that he never directly participated in abductions may help his case." The door opened once more and Bran entered the waiting area, his expression solemn. "They're letting me go," he said, approaching the group. "They said I'm not implicated in any of this." He looked at Emmy with genuine remorse. "I'm so sorry for what my family did to yours. I had no idea." Emmy studied him for a moment. "It's not your fault. You were just a child when it happened." Bran nodded gratefully, then turned to Clara. "It's strange to think that if I hadn't been working at the tavern tonight, you might never have made the connection." "Maybe it wasn't just chance," Clara suggested. "Maybe some things are meant to find a way." The detective cleared his throat. "We'll need both of you back tomorrow for additional statements. Detective Holden will be here too tomorrow, but you're free to go for now. Emmy, do you have somewhere you can stay tonight?" Emmy glanced at Clara, uncertainty in her eyes. I don't want to go back to the farm, not yet. Not until I process all of this." "You could stay with me in the motel if you want," Clara offered tentatively. "We can order another room." As they prepared to leave the station, the Kesslers were being led through the waiting area in handcuffs. Emmy stiffened at the sight of them, and John and Miriam both looked up, their faces etched with shame and regret. As the officers led the Kesslers away to processing, Bran approached Emmy once more. "It's strange," he said quietly. "Both of our lives were shaped by what happened 18 years ago, and neither of us knew it until today." In that moment, something shifted in Emmy's expression, a tentative acceptance, perhaps even the first fragile thread of trust. Clara squeezed her daughter's hand gently. "We have time now to figure it all out piece by piece." She asked her permission to embrace her, and when Emmy opened her arm, Clara embraced not only her daughter but who she had become, no longer her little girl Ella, but Emmy, a strong, independent spirit who had somehow found her way back against impossible odds. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, rediscovering what was lost and building something new in its place. The theatre of life had given them a second act neither had dared to imagine, one filled with the promise of healing, understanding, and a bond that even 18 years of separation couldn't sever completely.